Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Arbinger's webinar, Dangerous Love, Transforming Impossible Conflict. Thank you so much for making time for this webinar. It is a pleasure to have all of you, and it's an even greater pleasure to introduce the speaker today, Chad Ford. I have known Chad for nearly 15 years. In those 15 years, I've continued to learn a lot from Chad and his experiences working and helping transform conflict and building peace. I've also had the honor of attending his peace building program in Hawaii more than a decade ago. Chad is an international conflict mediator, a college professor, a senior consultant and facilitator for the Arbinger Institute, as well as an executive board member of Peace Players. After completing a master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University and a Juris Doctorate from Georgetown University Law School in 2000, Chad was poised to begin his career as a conflict mediator and facilitator. As the director of the David O. McKay Center for Intercultural Understanding at BYU, Hawaii, Chad created a major and certificate program in intercultural peace building, mediation, and facilitation. Chad's work has frequently taken him out of the classroom and into conflict zones around the world. He's made nearly 50 trips to the Middle East and has worked on numerous other conflicts around the world as a mediator and as a facilitator. Chad has served as a senior consultant, speaker, and facilitator for the Arbinger Institute since 2006, working with governments, NGOs, corporations like Nike, and as well as the US Olympic team. He's also helped Arbinger develop trainings, curriculum on conflict resolution, as well as the training guide on a reconciliation based on the documentary Beyond Right and Wrong. He's been able to combine his expertise on both sports and conflict by serving as an executive board member of the nonprofit peace-building organization, Peace Players. Chad has recently authored a book called Dangerous Love, which will be released, by the way, on the 23rd of June, 2020. And it will be available as an ebook on that day, audiobook, as well as the physical book. We will also have the physical books available in the Singapore office. Chad's work with young people in the classroom, athletes on the basketball court, struggling families in the living room, executives in the boardroom, and divided communities in some of the most challenging conflicts in the world gives them a unique perspective and a voice to the conflicts that plague our families, our organizations, and the world. Today, Chad will be sharing his ideas on a portion of the book, Dangerous Love. What does it take to transform impossible conflict? Without further ado, I present to you Chad Ford. Chad, all yours.
Thank you, Senthil. Like Senthil said, we've known each other for more than a decade, and I've always been deeply impressed with Senthil's wisdom, his grasp of Arbinger ideas, and his incredible personality and way of training. So it's an honor to finally meet some of you that have interacted with Senthil in Singapore. We've talked for years about me coming over there. Timing's not very good right now with COVID-19. So it's an honor to be with you virtually over Zoom today. And I want to talk about impossible conflict. And so when I think about the word conflict, I think about it differently, I think, than most people do. And when they hear the word conflict, this is the image that I'm fond of sort of showing in a setting here. This is a Viking map from the 1500s. And you'll notice all these sea monsters in the water there. And there was this belief that if you strayed too far from shore, there be monsters. And these monsters would essentially come and destroy your boat. And when I work with people, and one of the reasons I wrote this book and a lot of the work that I've done with Arbinger is because people are scared of conflict. I don't think that they should be, but they are. And that fear ends up transforming how they approach it and what they do with it, often getting bad outcomes in part because they believe that there's going to be bad outcomes. The same reason that sailors wouldn't move far from shore because they were convinced that monsters were going to eat them. And so they never got out in the ocean in the first place. So, destructive conflict, these are the words as a conflict mediator I hear all the time around with conflict. There's contention, anger, it's weak, it's anxious, it's broken and cold. These are the sorts of images that often come up with conflict. And then who wants to spend time being angry or fighting or feeling weak or having anxiety or feeling broken or having relationships feel cold? People don't want that, obviously. And so their approaches to conflict try to minimize for those destructive ends. And for those of you that are familiar with the Arbinger Institute, this is Arbinger's conflict diagram, right? It's called collusion. And you notice that there's two people in it, and each person is inviting the other person, right, into conflict with each other. I'm sure if you've done any Arbinger work, you're familiar with collusion. But here's how conflict looks like when we're in an inward mindset, right? All we see is that they see me as an object, and all we see is what they do, right, towards me. That's how we tend to perceive conflict when we're in inward mindset. And most of us that are in destructive conflict, that's where we are right now. We're in inward mindset, we're in a collusion, but we're only seeing one part of the collusion. The other half of the collusion is actually hidden to us. And so conflict feels impossible. And it's in large part because we believe it's impossible. In fact, the most common question that I get after doing workshops, after doing mediations, sometimes I've been with people for 10 hours and it's going to happen over and over again. They're going to ask sort of one of two questions. Why does it feel impossible? Because they won't change. Number one by far, right? So people will come up to me and say, look, I believe in everything you're saying here. I'm totally agree with this, but you don't know my boss, or you don't know my partners, or you don't know my spouse, or you don't know the people that I live with in my communities. They won't change. And because of that, conflict is going to last forever, right? And I'm going to suffer. Now, there are some people that actually say this. This is a much more honest response, frankly, so you don't hear it as much. I can't change, right? Conflict also often feels impossible too, because it requires something of me that I don't believe that I can actually do, whether it's confront someone, be honest about my feelings, whether it's owning up to my mistakes or changing my mindset or whatever it is. I don't believe I can do it. I've had a history of trying in the past. It doesn't work. So I can't change. And that, to me, are the two major reasons that conflict feels impossible. I either think that they won't change or I can't change. And conflict can't change if neither they nor I or one or both of us doesn't change. That's the sort of belief that I think makes it feel so impossible. So you're familiar with this diagram from Arbinger, right? Inward mindset. And what it tells us, others are objects. We think about how they impact me. And it's this thing over on the left of your screen. It's all about self-preservation. Inward mindset is self-preservation. It's about how others are impacting me, how other people in the organization are impacting me, how my customers are impacting me, how my coworkers are impacting me, how my boss is impacting me, how my spouse is impacting me. Everything is me, me, me. And because it's about their impact on me, it also often lacks accountability. It's self-absorbed. It says that what needs to change in this environment or this space is them, right? And until they change, my pain, suffering, conflict, it really can't go away. And that's all about self-preservation, right? And so I want to offer a little bit different definition of conflict today. I think that this one's a little bit unique, but I think for those of you that have studied Arbinger, this will make a lot of sense. Conflict is our inability to collaboratively solve problems with other people. Now, if you think about that for a minute, first of all, I hope that's less scary. You know, that's easier to sit with for a minute. And if you think about it, every day in our life, we are constantly facing problems. And for the most part, our lives, we solve them. We work together with our partners at work, with our customers, with our spouses, or what have you. We just solve them. But when they become unsolvable, when we try and fail to solve them, right, that is when conflict starts to really spin up, at least the destructive conflict that we're going to talk about today. And that's when it starts to feel impossible. But let's just hold that definition for a minute. our inability to collaboratively solve problems with other people. And then think about for a minute who you're in conflict with. And in this case, all you need to think about is there someone in my life that I'm struggling to solve a problem with right now? Right? Forget about they're a jerk or they're rude or they don't care about you or whatever that is. Just think about them for a minute as someone that I'm struggling to solve a problem with right now. And think about them, try to hold them in your mind for a minute, because everything else that I'm going to talk about, I think is going to be more relevant to you if you have an example, right? So think about, again, someone in your life right now that you're having a problem solving a problem with. Okay. Well, let me tell you a little story. This was actually told to me by an Arbinger facilitator, and I loved it so much. I asked him if I could use it in the book. He said, sure. So Philip is an Arbinger facilitator, but most of his life had been riddled with conflict. Even since he was a young person, he turned at times to alcoholism, sometimes to violence, had been divorced, had lost his job in the past, had a number of things that really were very negative that had happened to him. But he encountered Arbinger and learned about outward mindset and really started to transform his relationships at work and at home to the point that people actually really, really looked up to Philip. Philip had learned how to really apply outward mindset in relationships at home and work and made a huge difference in his life. Jackson is Philip's stepson. After all of this transformation for Philip, Philip got remarried. Jackson was his stepson. If you know anything about dynamics between parents and stepchildren, it is rife with conflict. It's a minefield with conflict. And Jackson wasn't really digging Philip very much. He resented Philip for marrying his wife. There was a number of different challenges that Philip was facing. And one day he picks up Jackson after school and he's driving Jackson home. And this is what Jackson says to Philip: "My dad says you're a liar," in the car. Now, I just want to pause for a minute, right? You already have a rocky relationship. You're trying your best to make this work. You're driving home in the car and your stepchild says to you, "My dad says you're a liar." Now, I can't see all your hands right now, but how many of you would get in the box the minute that you heard a phrase like that? When anyone calls us a liar, right? How many would get in the box, then get defensive, then push back on Jackson or perhaps Jackson's dad, and actually in the course of all of that, actually escalate the conflict? And I think the answer is that most of us would. Now, Philip knows all this stuff. He knows about Arbinger. He knows about outward mindset. But even the temptation for Philip is incredibly high here. So this is just the first little bit of the story. I'll tell you what happens a little bit later. So here's the interesting thing. We want to move from destructive conflict to constructive conflict. That's the goal. But knowing how to transform destructive conflict into constructive conflict it's critical. It's critical to our personal, our professional, our societal well-being. Yet by and large, we are terrible at it. We have a conflict styles test that we have on our website, and I'll have Senthil send that out and share it with you. But doing the sort of conflict styles that invite constructive conflict, far and away, our statistics show, when we've tested people around the world, it's the least one that people are adept at, right? So we don't really know how to do it. And one of the reasons I think is fear. Fear has a way of overwhelming us in conflict. It has a way of overwhelming leaders as well. And it dramatically changes our decision-making in the process. So even though we know about outward mindset, here's what happens in fear. This picture is a computer model of brain waves. And you'll notice that these colored lines are neural pathways, right? These are the way that our brain is sort of processing information. And some of the lines you see are thicker than others. The colors represents different parts of our brain. Our brain has different functions, right? And you'll notice that they're sort of like ruts, right? These are ruts, ways that our brain sort of thinks. This is a brain on fear. This is a brain scan of someone who's experiencing trauma or fear right now. And this may not mean a lot to you right now, but imagine for a minute that when you experience fear, your brain goes through sort of predictable patterns or ruts. The next brain, brain B, this is of a yogi. This is of someone who's doing meditation, someone who's experiencing a lot of peace and calm right now, the sort of opposite of fear. Look at the neural pathways. Look how many are there. Look at all the abilities to think and to process information that are happening when we're not experiencing fear on the right, as opposed to how we're experiencing fear on the left. It's really dramatic. Our brains get tunnel vision. And even though we may have learned a lot about outward mindset and how we're supposed to think and act in certain situations, when conflict comes our way, when we become afraid of what will happen to me because I can't collaboratively problem solve, our brains tend to drift to A. And so even though we may know better, our brains can't follow those know better pathways. They go to these negative pathways. And that leads us to conflict styles. And so there's a number of conflict styles. I'm going to talk about 5: competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. And you'll notice that there's axes on these, right? So some are more assertive than others. Competing and collaborating are more assertive than avoiding or accommodating. Some are more cooperative than others. Accommodating and collaborating are more cooperative than competing or avoiding. And the sweet spot, obviously, is something that's assertive, gets things done, and it's cooperative. We get things done together. That's collaborating up in the upper right. But when we're experiencing fear, collaboration feels almost impossible. And so we tend to gravitate towards other styles. The most popular being, again, we've tested people from all over the world, all sort of ages. Avoidance in every gender, every age category, every demographic is by far the highest. And when I say avoidance, I mean I'm running, I'm hiding, I'm ignoring, I'm pretending, or suffering in silence in the face of the conflict. In other words, I'm just pretending it doesn't exist. And the need it fulfills is protection, right? We avoid conflict because we're afraid of conflict, or perhaps the people that we are in conflict with. And in general, it paints conflict as just dangerous to the relationship, right? We don't engage in conflict because it's going to damage our business relationship, my standing at work, my relationship with my kids or wife at home. And so let's just pretend that it's not there. And this is the go-to move for many people in conflict on fear. In fact, I think it would be the go-to move more if it wasn't for the fact that sometimes conflict just can't be avoided. No matter how much we wish that we could avoid it, we can't, which leads to accommodation. Now I have another fork in the road. I can't avoid it. Where do I go? Well, accommodation is always saying yes, giving in when others push back, feeling like you won't be loved or you disagree. If you disagree or speak your mind, there's a need in there to be liked. And it paints your needs as dangerous to the relationship. In other words, if I talk about what I need or want in this relationship or at work or what have you, it is going to destroy that relationship. So it's better just to say yes. From an arbinger perspective, people that often struggle with a must be seen as or need to be seen as or worse than box might find themselves often gravitating towards a conflict style like this. There's also competition. Competition is sort of the opposite of accommodation. It's arguing, it's debating, it's manipulating, it's forcing, it's trying to win the conflict. The need it fulfills is to be right. And it paints others' needs as dangerous to the relationship. So if they get what they want, it's somehow going to hurt me or the organization. So I need to fight as hard as I can to get what I want, because what they want is wrong-headed, it's dangerous to me, it's dangerous to others within the organization, and so I fight. There's a fourth conflict style that many of us are taught is the right conflict style, which is to compromise. And that's splitting the difference, giving up things you want to get other things that you want. You give and take. The need it fulfills is to be fair. And from a view of conflict, there's this idea that we both need to win and to lose to get a fair outcome, right? And hopefully you win the things that are most important to you and they win the things that are most important to them. And so whatever it is that we lost, at least it wasn't the most important things. But research is overwhelming on compromise, that when people engage in compromise solutions to problems, they tend to focus after the fact on what they did not get out of the compromise, what they had to give up to what they've got. And it's a natural human tendency. Once I get whatever it is that I wanted, and now I have it. And so now I have time to focus on the things that I didn't get. And it leads to reoccurring conflict over and over again. Finally, there's collaboration. And collaboration is valuing the needs of both yourself and others, creative problem solving, willingness to engage even when you don't agree. The need it fulfills is to be in a relationship. And there's a cocoon view that says we can solve problems together and meet both of our needs. It means that we look at other people with an outward mindset way and say their needs, dreams, and desires matter as much to me as mine do. And therefore, the only solution that is going to have lasting results and sustainable results is one that's going to meet all of those needs together. So we can do, I don't know if we can, we have time. Let's see if I can do a little poll. Oh, you know what? We're a little bit tight on time, so we won't do a poll here, but we can ask afterwards which of those conflict styles you think are the most that you're most likely to fall in, especially with the person that you were thinking about here. And so outward mindset is a focus on us preservation. It's collaboration, right? It's seeing my needs, wants, and dreams, but also their wants, needs, and dreams is equal to mine. Inward mindset, I focus only on me, right? Me preservation. And avoiding is about me, right? I'm scared of conflict. Accommodating is about me. It doesn't look like it because I'm giving them what I want, but why am I giving them what they want? Because I want to be liked, right? And that's the trade-off that I have. And competing, again, is another one, right, where I'm focused again intensely on my needs. There's another one. So compromise looks a little bit different. Notice that the red arrows go outward now, right? So it looks like I'm thinking about them because I'm giving up some of what I want and they're getting some of what they want. But notice how it's still inward, because primarily my thought, even in compromise, is about getting what I want, maximizing my gains, minimizing my losses, trying to get as much from them as I possibly can and give up as little as I can. That's not collaboration. I always say that, look, collaboration from an inward, I can do almost any behavior in two ways. Inward mindset, it looks like compromise. Outward mindset, it looks like collaboration. The behaviors look pretty similar, but the motivations behind them are pretty different. So let's talk about Philip for a minute and what his fear brain could have done in the moment. Remember, Philip's in the car with Jackson. Jackson tells him, "My dad says you're a liar," right? Now, Philip could do a couple of things if he's in a fear brain right now. One is that he could avoid the conflict altogether. He could not say anything back to Jackson. He could suffer in silence. He could be the bigger man and just not decide to engage the conflict at all. But do you think that's going to solve the problem between Philip and Jackson and the long-term relationship? I think we all know the answer is no. And while there might be some wisdom in Philip, if he's angry, not screaming at Jackson or saying something that he shouldn't, there's no sustainable solution there. Philip could accommodate and just say what he liked about Jackson, or say, "Hey, Jackson, let's go get ice cream together." Or, "Hey, Jackson, let's go do something that you really like," right? Try to avoid the conflict in a different way by giving Jackson something else that he wants. Philip could get competitive. He could go right back at Jackson and say, "Actually, the person who's a liar is your dad. And here's why. And here's why I'm a better dad than your dad is. And why don't you respect me?" He could dive into that as well. I want to talk about the collaborative thing that Philip did next. Philip, again, remember, had been practicing outward mindset for 10 years and had been using it in all sorts of high pressure situations in his life. When he heard Jackson, he told me, man, my first reaction, I gripped my steering wheel. I clenched my teeth a little bit. I know Jackson's dad. I used to actually work with Jackson's dad. He had a problem with me when I worked with him. He had a bigger problem with me when I married his ex-wife. He began thinking through that, but then he started looking at Jackson, right? And what he wanted was not self-preservation, not to look good here, but us preservation. How do I mend this relationship and make this a more collaborative relationship with Jackson? And so this is what Philip responded to Jackson. Jackson, I'm not sure exactly what your dad's talking about, but I know your dad. He's a good guy. And so if he says that, there must be some reason, some good reason behind it. Now, Jackson was stunned, but he was still a little bit in the box. So he asked Philip, well, what would it be? And Philip said, look, I don't know specifically actually what your dad might be referring to, but I can tell you this. I've lied a lot in my life. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've told lies. And then Philip recounted much of his life history, much of the negative parts of his life, and said, look, I can't push back at your dad because he said it, because that's also been true about me in my life. I've told lies before. And so instead of attacking your dad or you, I'm just going to own that I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and here's what I learned. And so as he tells Jackson all of this and explains to Jackson what he learned and what he learned from telling those lies and the consequences of it and everything else, Jackson sits silent on the other side of the car. And when he gets done, Jackson looks at Philip and says, I think my dad got this one wrong about you. I think he got it wrong. And Philip said at that moment, his relationship with Jackson changed. Philip decided to let go of his ego, to let go of any sort of box that he harbored against Jackson's dad or Jackson himself. And he decided to build trust in the relationship. And he did it by being brutally honest about his weaknesses and his mistakes, and really about seeing Jackson as a person. And it changed the entire dynamic. And here's the thing that we laughed about. Philip literally told Jackson, yeah, I'm a liar. And Jackson's response to that was to say, I think my dad's wrong about calling you a liar. Now that's a pretty amazing response. And I've seen it happen over and over again. So how do we overcome fear? And I want to talk just in the last few minutes about why I named the book Dangerous Love and why I wrote it. I've obviously worked with Arbinger for years. Arbinger's work has been foundational to the way that I think about mediation and conflict resolution. But I've often found that, especially in conflicts that require relationship at work or at home, and most of them do, right? That just saying I'm outward towards someone isn't enough. There's got to be actually a deeper level of care and concern there if we're going to solve the hardest and most difficult and impossible problems that we face. And so conflict is scary because when love isn't easy, right? When it's hard to like another person or they don't like us, or when it's hard to see someone else as a person or they're not seeing us as a person, the more dangerous conflict feels. It's that when we let that fear of conflict and the people we are in take hold, our ability to solve the problems that underlie the dispute diminish dramatically, to the point that we literally say the word impossible. This is impossible. I can literally say that in hundreds of mediations and conflict interventions that have been successfully transformed, people said throughout the engagement, this is impossible. This will go nowhere. Nothing can change. And so if I believe it won't change, it's hard to change. But what if there was a way to see conflict and the people we are in conflict with differently? What if we could learn to love the people that we are in conflict with? And I like this story about Philip because what he did was not just turn the tables on Jackson. He actually loved him by telling him the truth. And I'm not talking about the love that is romantic or even the sort of love that means like. In other words, we don't have to like the people that we are in conflict with, but we do need to see their humanity so clearly that their needs, wants, desires, matter as much to me as my own. That's the only way that you really get. So what is dangerous love? And while many people hear that word and they think, oh, well, that's soft, I actually find that it's anything but soft. In fact, it's what scares people about conflict. It calls upon us to be vulnerable, to open ourselves up with no guarantee that the person or people on the other side of the conflict will do the same. And I want to think about 4 steps in dangerous love. 1, we have to let go of our fear of conflict. We have to believe that conflict in and of itself is not inherently dangerous, right? Destructive conflict is, but as long as I apply an outward mindset towards conflict, conflict is not going to be dangerous. 2, I have to let go of the fear of the people that I am in conflict with. In other words, I can't be afraid of the people that I'm in conflict with. That's seeing them as an object, right? We have to be able to see them as people when we're in conflict. Step 3, I have to turn first. In Arbinger, we talk about the most important move, right? And that's me turning towards the other person that I'm in conflict with, not waiting for them to turn. And then step 4 is then I create space that invites them to turn. And so if you remember this, I call this the most dangerous move, because if you imagine 2 people that are back to back with each other and they're in conflict with each other and they're elbowing each other, they feel each other, but they don't see each other. And both parties will say, look, this conflict will end when the other person stops elbowing me and turns and sees me as a person. But of course, because both sides are saying that, they wait forever for the other person to turn. The most dangerous move is when I decide to turn, even if it doesn't feel fair, even if it feels like they started it first, even if there's the chance that the other person is not going to turn back, that they're going to take advantage, or that they're going to be mean, or they're not going to meet my vulnerability with more vulnerability, they're going to stonewall. Whatever that is, I turn first because that is the space that opens up the other person to turn. And then I invite other people to turn. And I invite other people to turn by simply staying turned towards them, regardless of how they see me, regardless of how they act back towards me. I continue to try to find collaborative solutions to problems until I essentially wear down people, till they begin to trust and respect that I'm not only working towards my self-interest, but theirs as well. That's dangerous love. It's not something that I think can just be generated from a sense of, well, this is the right thing to do. It has to be a sense of a connection that I have with another person, that I care enough about their outcomes, that I'm willing to turn first and then stay turned and be patient while we wait for them to turn. Well, that's a quick overview of just 1 chapter of Dangerous Love, transforming fear and conflict at home, at work, in the world. We have a website, dangerouslovebook.com, that you can go on, find a lot more. We are on Facebook at Dangerous Love Book and a Loving Dangerously community. And we have a podcast that we have every week. Robert Quinn, the Dean of the Michigan School of Business, the MBA program at the University of Michigan, one of the top ranked programs in the country, is on our podcast on Thursday. And then Mitch Warner will be the next week, one of the managing partners of the Arbinger Institute. And so you can find out more there. You can find the book online, in print, on Audible, on ebook as well. And I think we're going to stop there and turn the time over for some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Chad. That was really helpful. The thing that stuck to me was, the most dangerous move, right, is really about getting out of our own fear, right? Because if we don't get out of our own fear, right, it's impossible to see the other person as a person, see the humanity in the other person. And a lot of people don't, I think, at least me in my life, right, I don't realize it is the getting out of my fear that is the first step, right? Because if I don't acknowledge that fear and learn how to get out of it, nothing else is going to change. All the other patterns in the brain are not available for me to consider, right? So let's see if there are any questions in the chat box here. What inspired you to write this book, Chad? That is the first question.
Yeah, so I've been a conflict resolution professor for the past 15 years. And whenever we started talking about conflict and conflict resolution, I was always amazed by the level of fear and anxiety people had, even hearing the word conflict. And as I started thinking about even in like mediations that I did, the hardest part for any mediator is actually getting the parties in the room, to get them to sit down together. The fear of the conflict is so high, and what's going to happen. A lot of times I get like one person in, but the other person wouldn't show, or the other person would sit there and they wouldn't say anything, or the other person would just explode in anger or what have you. And I started to realize, look, that there is this pervasive fear of conflict that has become a self-fulfilling prophecy in these relationships. And until I can teach people how to let go of that, they can't actually get to the part that they really want to get to, which is the collaborative problem-solving part, so that they can solve their problems. And just to, Senthel's point, I even found in my own life, it was the same thing. Fear was often clouding my judgment about doing the right thing. Even when I learned Arbinger, and I walked away from my first Arbinger experience saying, I'm never going to see another person as an object. I'm going to see everybody as a person. And lo and behold, within hours, I was back in the box and seeing people as objects. I often found that it was my fear that was keeping me from being able to actually live truly in an outward mindset way and lead in an outward mindset way. And so the inspiration for the book was, how do we attack dangerous things, not with competition or with weapons or with harsh words, not by avoiding it or running from it, but meeting it with love. And the red and blue arrows were really symbolic to me of an image that I talk about a lot, which is that if there's a fire in your home, how many of you would choose fire as a way to put out the fire? The answer is no one. No one would try to go get more fire and think that would put out the fire, nor would the solution be to walk out of the house and pretend the fire isn't there, nor would the solution be to go and just talk nicely to the fire or tell the fire how great the fire is. You meet fire with water, right? And the water is blue. We meet fire with water, but our instinct in conflict is actually to meet fire with fire or to run away from the fire or what have you. Wow. And so how do we learn how to meet fire with water?
Wow, Chad, beautiful insight, right? So when we have fear, everything we do actually exaggerates the fear and the fire, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we have a ton of questions coming, so we're not going to let you go yet, Chad. So the next one is, somebody wants to know, can you share what are the other chapters in your Dangerous Love book? Can you quickly share what the other chapters look like?
So the book is essentially broken into 4 sections. And there's stories with every section. I'm telling stories from my life experiences. Some are my own conflicts, or some are clients that I've worked with in the past. The first quarter of the book talks about our fear of conflict and how to overcome that fear. We look at some of the research behind fear and what causes that fear. And then we look at some ways that we can change our attitudes towards conflict itself. The second part of the book is the part that I think most of you will be most familiar with, where I engage the Arbinger language in thinking about what causes fear of other people. And that's primarily around mindset, seeing people as objects. And there's 2 chapters on collusion in there as well, this time specifically applied to conflict, but very much right with the Arbinger language and using the Arbinger language to have us think about conflict and the people we are in conflict with. Then the third part is around turning first and thinking about how it is that we can get the courage to turn first, what that looks like, how does it look in different situations, what about situations of abuse, what about situations where it actually literally is dangerous. I mean, we cover a lot of different scenarios in that. And then finally, it's about inviting other people to turn. And I think that typically in Arbinger, we just say, look, we invite other people to turn by being out of the box towards them. But I really wanted to go deeper into some techniques that I've learned over the years, some reconciliation techniques. And we talk about 4. We have a chapter on truth-telling and a chapter on mercy and a chapter on justice and a chapter on building sustainable trust that I think are 4 really powerful tools in helping other people invite them out of the conflict as well. And so that's where it ends. Every other chapter has personal personal application, where there are exercises that you can go through thinking about conflicts in your own life and then trying out these exercises at home to see if they get you down the path towards transforming your conflict.
Thanks, Chad. And knowing Chad and the experiences he has, right? I mean, the stories that are going to be in the book are going to be amazing, gripping, So I'm really looking forward to the book as well. Chad, a couple of questions, right? One is, when mediating conflict, how do we invite one or both parties to make the first move? And the related question is, how do we, after we turn, how do we persevere remaining turned when the other person is just refusing to turn, right? The related questions, maybe you can address both. Yeah.
Well, as far as a mediator goes, I would say there's two things that I've learned over the years. The first one might surprise you a little bit. If I'm not turning first in my own conflicts, even though the parties might not know anything about it, it's amazing how much my words lose their moral force. It's as if people can sense that I'm talking about them overcoming fear, but I'm not willing to do it myself. And so the first thing that I say in my life is I'm asking myself all the time as a mediator, where in my life am I afraid to turn? Because if I'm going to ask other people to do it, knowing how scary it is, but I'm not willing to do it in my own life, it's just not going to work. And then that often means that I have to share some stories about the things that I'm scared of and the things that have been really hard for me to turn as well. The second thing is just simply asking people, what would happen if you don't turn? Right? What is that going to look like? And what are the costs involved in not turning? How long is this likely to last? How much pain are you experiencing? How much money are you losing? How much sleep are you losing? I mean, you go through the list with them and say, now, okay, so if you do nothing, what is it that invites them to turn? How are they going to turn? And this is how conflict feels impossible. They can't, so conflict won't change. And then it's really about giving them some tools to think about how to actually turn first and how there is something that they can do. You all know this from Arbinger, but collusion diagrams end the minute that one person gets out of the box. You cannot sustain a collusion with only one person. And so again, using collusion diagrams as well, but really helping them. One of the things that I ask them all the time is they're telling me what they're doing. Everything they tell me that they're doing, I ask them, how's it going? And their answer is always, it's going terribly. That's why I wouldn't be talking to you if it was going well. And I'm like, okay, can we stop doing that then? Right? Because everything that you're thinking is with a fear brain in conflict right now. And of course, because of that, right, you're actually creating more fear. The other thing I actually tell people, because I think a lot of people sort of know this, is that animals sense fear. Right. And with dogs or any sort of aggressive animals, if they sense fear in you, they actually get more aggressive. And that the alpha in the group is the one that shows no fear back. And I said, human beings aren't that different from animals that way. Like, we sense other people's fear, and it actually creates more mistrust. Now, the second part of the question was what, Senthil?
Yeah. What if, I've turned, but the other person is just simply refusing to turn, right?
Yeah. That happens. And you can apply everything in the book and do it perfectly and do it with an outward mindset. And it's possible that they may not turn, right? Because Arbinger is a language of agency at the end of the day. You don't make me get in the box. You don't make me see someone as a person, nor do you make me see someone as an object, which means that I also can't do that either. And here's the really interesting insight that I've learned over the years from this. When I let go of that, inviting them to turn, fair enough, but trying to make them turn or force them to turn or manipulate them to turn or whatever, when I just let go of all of that and I turn not for those reasons, but just because it's the right thing to do, just because I can control my experience, that, by the way, is the most powerful invitation to turn. But let's say that they don't. And you've been doing this for weeks, or you've been doing this for months, or maybe even you've been doing this for years and they're still turned with their back towards you. Here's what I say, and it can only be of some comfort to you. That's going to hurt, first of all. And there's nothing about feeling hurt or disappointment or sadness that my relationship isn't what I wish it could be that's inward, right? We can be outward and still feel those emotions. And in fact, I think that's partly what's so scary and vulnerable about turning first is that they might not react the same way. That's why I say dangerous love isn't soft, because that one of the scariest things I can do is turn towards a person, open myself up, be vulnerable without any idea of what they're going to actually do or say back, right? And understanding that I ultimately don't have any control over that. And so first I want to say it's going to hurt. However, what will hurt more is to turn back around and turn my back towards them and begin elbowing them again. And the reason that it will hurt more is that once I've seen them that way, I now have to build even more justification. And I have just now created a situation that makes it even less likely that they'll ever turn, right? So if I stay turned towards them, yes, it's true, they may not turn, but the invitation is there. It's always there. If I turn back around, is that you could be going 2 months, seeing them perfectly as a person, being outward mindset towards them, and you slip up one day and they pounce on you, right? They pounce on you. But I always think about the dynamic of why. Why didn't they turn? What does that tell you about why they didn't turn? They didn't trust you. They didn't trust that your motivations for turning were legitimate. They didn't trust that the reason that you turned was out of a genuine concern for them, as opposed to some sort of manipulation to get something that you wanted out of them. So the minute that you slip up, they pounce because they were convinced that it was insincere in the first place. If I turn back around away from them again because they didn't turn, then they were right. It was insincere. Because ultimately I turned because I wanted to see a result from them as opposed to seeing a result from myself. And so all it really is, as painful as it is validation that actually they were right to hesitate. And so as much as I hate to tell you, you're patient and you love, that's all we can do. But I will tell you this, why it may not change them, it will surely change you. It will change the way that you feel about yourself and others. It will change your ability to sleep at night, to eat, to feel internal peace. Because when I'm seeing someone correctly, when I'm seeing someone with love, whether they see me that way back or not, it does something to me that's transformative, that completely changes the conflict.
Thank you, Chad. Just a few more questions. Here's another one. One of the key takeaways from this, learn to love the humanity of the person you're in conflict with. What can we do if we cannot accept the other person's motivation needs? For example, the other person's needs may be in direct conflict with our deeply rooted values. Yeah.
Where this comes up a lot, I do a lot of work in the Middle East with Israelis and Palestinians, and that's been my primary large socio-political conflict that I've worked with. And their political aspirations are pretty dramatically different from each other. Just to be honest, right? What the Israelis want and what the Palestinians want, there's a reason that there's been failed peace process after failed peace process after failed peace process, in part because what they want at times is so diametrically opposed. And so why do I keep working there? It's not because I have some sort of brilliant solution to the problem that they're not thinking of. I actually think that what we want out of conflict feels very different when we're practicing dangerous love than when we're not. So in other words, what I say that I want out of a conflict when I'm in an inward mindset might be very, very different when I'm in an outward mindset. And the same way. And so when I hear Israelis and Palestinians going back and forth with incompatible, what they want, I can never stomach or trust. What I actually hear is I'm still not seeing them dangerously, right? And so, for example, one of the most interesting things that comes out of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in my eyes is that both sides want security. Both sides want the freedom to exist and have their identity. And they deeply and compassionately argue this point, but they can't recognize the other side's need for the same thing. That they see that somehow my security is somehow independent from your security, or my need for self-actualization or identity is somehow diametrically opposed to mine. And so when I say that when I say the word love, I don't say that I like their position or that I agree with their position or that I think their needs or wants are my needs or wants, or even that I think that they're choosing the best needs or wants for them, right? That's not what collaboration means. It means that I take someone at their face value, that that's what they need. And I still hold on to the things that I need that are important to me. And I roll up my sleeves and I keep working and working at it until I come up with a solution that works for both of us. And I certainly don't know your situation, but I know that in many, many situations that I've worked in, that people have given up way too early in finding that collaborative solution because they're still not loving dangerously. They're still not being vulnerable. They're still waiting for the other person to turn, or they just hear what another person needs and discuss them. And maybe this is the mediator in me, because I really try to be neutral. I don't go into conflict saying, okay, I want this outcome or this outcome. I want the parties to have the outcome that I think they deeply want that will make them happy. I don't care what that is, as long as it's going to make them happy, right? As long as it's coming from an outward space, it can be whatever it is. It could be a political system that's different than mine, or a religious system or belief or whatever. What I want to honor is that it's theirs and it matters deeply to them. And so I would say to you, for all those things that you feel diametrically opposed to you right now, ask more questions, ask more why questions, get more backstory, try to understand why the people are saying what they want and why they're taking the positions that they take. And the more whys that you ask, the more that you may find an alternative, creative, collaborative path to meeting those needs that you just haven't thought of before.
Chad, thank you so much. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to take another couple of questions. How do you now manage fear that is crippling you, and how do you make fear into an opportunity? How do you see fear as an opportunity? Both, right? One that is crippling you, how do you deal with it? The other one, how do you look at fear as an opportunity?
I'll tell kind of a deeply personal story here about the thing that scared me the most in my life and what I learned about it. A number of years ago, I was working in refugee camps in the Middle East, and I got very, very ill with a bacteria that came in my stomach. Senthil may even remember this. I lost like a huge, like 30% of my body weight, maybe even more in the process. And as I was running around the doctors trying to find a solution to that, and I was taking drug therapy and just a number of other things to try to get it fixed, nothing was working. I couldn't sleep at night. I was up on the internet researching all the time. I was afraid. I thought that I may die in the process. And I was in a lot of physical pain at the time as well, which I know that we're all a bit afraid of and that nobody really enjoys. And I had this friend who was a Buddhist monk. And he came to visit me in Hawaii one day, and he gave me his prayer bowl. It was a Tibetan prayer bowl. And I don't know if you've seen these bowls before, but they're metal bowls, and you take a wood stick and you make them hum. And he told me that he used this in his meditation all the time. And he gave me the bowl and told me how to make it sing. And he said, basically, I take it in the palm of my hand, I set the bowl in there, and I move the stick around and make it sing. And I practiced for a little bit until I could get it humming and sort of singing. You can feel the whole bowl vibrating. And then he said, now grip the bowl. And when I gripped the bowl, it stopped singing immediately. The bowl wasn't able to vibrate. The sound cut off altogether. And he said, okay, now take the bowl out of your hand and set it to your side. Now make it sing. And I'm like, well, I have to be holding it and I have to be doing it. He's like, no, just set it over there and make it sing. And I said, I can't. He said, look, the only way to make the bowl sing is to hold it with an open hand. And now I want you to, he said, when I meditate, what I think about every day is, what is it that I'm gripping too tightly, that I'm trying to control, right? That I'm trying to make it work for me? And what are the things that I'm so scared of that I've set them aside? I'm not even looking at them. I'm not even holding them anymore, right? And I think about those things, and I try to figure out, how do I open my hand to them and let them sit there and be, right? I don't need to control it, nor do I need to run away from it. I just let it go where it's there. And as he was talking to me, he said, look, you have these living things, these bacteria in your stomach, and you're fighting them. And at other times, what I was trying to do was be tough and just pretend that it wasn't there and act like, I wasn't sick or whatever. You have to hold it with an open hand. It's there. It's inside of you. And once you open your hand to the fear, you'll know the path of what to do next. And it was really interesting as I began to meditate and using that bowl every day, I would say, am I gripping it too tightly? Have I set it aside? And I think that is a great metaphor for fear, right? Sometimes we're afraid because we want to control things. And we are so invested in making something go the right way that we spend all night thinking about it, all of our time and energy trying to control it. But we can't control other people. And certainly we can't control their way of being or their mindset. So how do I open my hand to it? Other times, because it's so scary for us or because we feel overwhelmed, we set it aside and try to not do anything with it and pretend it's not there. But I can't solve my problems by pretending that they're not there. I have to open my hand to it. So how do I just sit with fear? I don't have to shoo it away. I don't have to solve it. I don't have to fix it. I don't have to conquer it. I don't have to pretend it's not there. I just have to hold it and sit with it. And every time that I've been able to do that, the fear slowly just starts to dissipate and go away. And it's replaced with creative ideas and thoughts about how do I go forward in this in a way that's going to be healthy and healing for me. I literally believe that approach saved my life. I mean, I really actually do. But what I've actually found too is it's saved relationships at home, at work, in so many different settings as well. Open your hand.
Chad, thank you so much for your sharing. This is really, wonderful. It helped me reflect on my own life. I cannot say how thankful I am and to be part of this 1 hour with you. When we think about conflict, right, we always start to think about the worst conflicts in the world and how they are not going away. This is what people need. We start to think about all the big scenarios, right? But we forget that conflict actually starts with the little things that we need to do on a daily basis. You are sharing a lot of stories about Israel and Palestine, Yeah, but the big conflict still exists. But how many people actually know the number of lives and people, relationships that were healed by your 50-odd visits to the Middle East, right? The villages, the border villages between the Israelis and the Palestinians, right? There are so many amazing stories of peace, people coming out of their fear and healing, So as we close this session, I'd like to invite all of us to be thinking about the little things that we can do to start transforming conflict, right? It might seem impossible, but it starts with little steps, and let's not be burdened by the big conflicts in the world, which are not going away at all. Because, I know Chad and the amount of work that he has done in the Middle East and all the different peoples, right? Palestinians, Israelis, that were healed. They have come together as one, seeing each other's humanity. And it's simply amazing. Chad, last words from you. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in the session. Yeah.
Thank you, Senthil. Actually, that's a perfect way. My second to the last chapter is called Small and Simple Things. And there's a quote that I love that just says, by small and simple things are great things brought to pass. And the idea that people ask me all the time, because I'm working in the Middle East, well, what about the big stuff? Will it solve the Middle East crisis or whatever? And the answer is, I honestly don't know. But what I do know is that it can change individual relationships, families, and communities. And what is an individual? What is a family? It's made up of individuals. What is a community? A community is made up of families. What is a country? It is a place that is made up of communities. And when they start to change, they become powerful invitations to other people to change. And so while I've been working on that conflict for 15 years, and Senthil's right, from the outside, watching the politics, not much has changed. And maybe some ways you could say it's worse. If I took you with me for a week to families, to individuals, to schools, to villages, to mosques, to synagogues, you would see that some of these people and communities have transformed dramatically. And because they've transformed, they have become the voices for peace within their countries and their organizations. And that I believe that if you come see me in another 15 or 20 years, maybe, just maybe, we're going to see something even bigger happen. But I always end with this phrase that, look, it may not change the world, but it will surely change you. And it will change the relationships in your families, in your communities in ways that will feel like the world.
Beautiful closing chat. Thank you so much. And everybody on the webinar, thank you so much for your participation. Feel free to send us emails. We will be sending you a link to the conflict management styles. We encourage you to get hold of the book. It's going to be inspiring, and it's going to invite us to be part of the change that we would like to see in our parts of the world. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.